What we're going to do today is to go over some of the basic concepts of Chapter 1. So I will go through each slide. You can take notes if you want. You don't have to because you can watch this video as many times as you want. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'm here to help. So first, let me define what sociology is. Sociology is technically the study of society. What we're looking at is we're looking at how society shapes human behaviors, interactions, beliefs, values, etc. We're not looking at certain social phenomena as individualistic. For example, if you have someone who is committing a crime, a sociologist would never look at the individual and they would never try to explain what that individual did based on his own personal individual life. What they would look at instead is they would look at how society and societal forces shape that individual's actions. Okay? What the sociological imagination is, first of all, that's a term that you'll hear a lot throughout this course, so make sure that you kind of understand that early on. But what that is it's exactly what I just said. So it's looking at larger societal forces and how they shape human behavior. So looking at class. What's a person's class? What background did they come from? What is their race or ethnicity? What is their sex? What is their religious background? So you're looking at all these factors that might have some kind of influence on human behaviors or beliefs or interactions or actions. In this sense, society is sort of larger than the individual, okay? So as sociologists, we are looking at how society shapes the individual, okay? The difference between, for example, sociology and psychology is that psychologists tend to look at individual minds. They tend to look more into the inner workings of the brain. They don't study societal forces when they're talking about whatever they may be talking about. Okay, so say for example, say they're talking about addictions. A psychologist would be much more prone to look at what's happening inside that individual's brain, and they would go into detail like nerves, the activity that's happening in the brain to cause an individual to have this addiction. Whereas a sociologist would look at, okay, what are the types of things that led to this individual to having an addiction? Okay, we see an addiction as societal because you can find, for example, addictions in one country that if you look at another country or society, they might not have this high rate of, say drug addicts or say a specific type of drug or maybe alcohol. So we're looking at, well, what's going on in that particular society that is causing this phenomenon of addiction. Let me give you guys another example. This is a young woman. Her name was Hope Witzel, and she, a few years ago, she was caught up in a situation where she was being bullied for she took a picture of herself topless and sent it to a guy that she liked, and that picture got intercepted by somebody else, and that somebody else sent it to a bunch of other people. Long story short, the picture got sent around the entire school and even to other schools, and it was like a neighborhood gossip, okay? And she was going through a lot of difficulty in school dealing with bullying and people calling her names like slut and whore. She couldn't even walk through the hallways without being bombarded with these hateful words and feeling threatened and bullied. Eventually, she actually ended up committing suicide. Okay, she took her own life. She hung herself. A sociologist would look at these types of questions. For example, okay, we wouldn't look at it as an individual case. We would have to ask all types of questions. First of all, what was she like? What were her beliefs and values? How did she grow up? What kind of family did she grow up in? Did she grow up in a broken home, for example? Did she grow up with parents who were really, really strict or parents who weren't strict? What kind of classmates was she surrounded with? What kind of a neighborhood was this? Was this a small town versus a city? And why might that affect the situation? What were the religious values of the community? Was this a very religious type of small town community, which again could have a huge impact on the situation? Um, Sociologists would look at bullying in general. Why is bullying becoming something that people are talking about a lot nowadays? Why all of a sudden are we seeing a lot more bullying happening? Um, we would look at things like what's her social or economic class? What class did she come from? What class did her bullies come from? Could that have an effect? Okay, for example, are middle class or upper class rich kids more likely to engage in bullying versus, working class or poor kids? What kind of characteristics do these bullies share? What about sexting? How has sexting become widespread? And that has a lot to do with new technology. So we wouldn't even have a scenario like this 50 years ago, for example, because we didn't have, cell phones. We didn't have the ability to take a picture and send it instantaneously to 50 people, for example. So again, we're looking at all these societal larger factors that might help to explain why people do the things that they do, or why people believe or feel or act the ways that they do. Okay, so in conclusion, sociology would be the scientific and systematic study of society and social interaction. And we have to make sure that we are aware that sociology is a science. So we are not just making up things as we go along. You can't just, be a sociologist and just kind of say your opinions. It's not really about opinions. You have to back them up. And we will look more into that in chapter 2. So sociologists study the culture and they study institutions in society and how they affect social behaviors. Now, what do I mean by social institutions? When I say social institutions, most people think immediately of a mental institution. And I say, you know what, that is one social institution. Certainly, mental institutions are that's one institution. Basically, an institution is anything that plays a pivotal role in society um, that can shape people's behaviors. So you can have the family as an institution. Sociologists they point to the family as being the most important institution. Why? Because that's where people are raised from, infants up into, adolescence or adulthood. That's where they're taught all the norms and values. It all starts in the home. The home is considered the building block of society. But so other social institutions could be universities, medical institutions like hospitals or doctors' offices, laws, okay, courts, things like that. That's an institution. The government is an institution. Mass media is an institution. All of these major mechanisms within a society that play an important social role and that have some kind of effect on people's behaviors. The next aspect of this chapter that I would like to go over are the three main sociological perspectives. As you see in this picture, you've got two people standing in an art museum looking at one piece of art. Okay, both of these people standing in front of this piece of art might look at this piece of art and have a different interpretation of what that art means. Okay, what that piece of art means. The one person on the right might think, okay, I see this piece of art as meaning A, B, or C. The other person on the left might say, no, no, no. I think this piece of art is telling a different story. I think you should look at it in this perspective. Well, the same thing goes for sociology, okay? different sociologists look at society in different types of frameworks, all right? The first two sociological perspectives, and we talk really about three main perspectives, but there are more, okay? But the first two perspectives are macro level or bird's eye view perspectives. And what they tend to do is pretend that you are in an airplane and you're looking out of the window at the world below and you're seeing all the buildings and the streets and the parks and the water and everything from a third person bird's eye view. You're looking above the world, okay? And you're looking at large patterns, okay? That's what macro level means, bird's eye view. So the first being structural functionalism or just functionalism. As long as you remember function, the word function, then you really can't go wrong and you will remember this perspective, because what it basically says is that society for the most part is functioning well. Okay, for the most part, there is general harmony in society, and that's because each institution is playing an important role, and that they all function together to create a general harmony, kind of like the human body. You've got all these different organs working and doing their part, playing their part to sustain a stable body. The founder of structural functionalism is Auguste Comte, who is also the founder of sociology, and then Emile Durkheim, who is another influential sociologist, one of the founding fathers. Okay, so here's Auguste Comte. He's called the father of modern sociology. He is the founder of positivism. And what positivism is, he looked at society as being able to be interpreted with the scientific method. So he believed that societal phenomena, different things that we're studying in society, could be explained using facts. The same type of scientific method that we use in the natural sciences, like biology and physics, could be applied to society. Okay? Now, Comte also talked about three stages that human society had gone through that led up to this positivist type of thinking. And the first stage was the theological stage, where society was basically governed by the Catholic Church, and God and religion played a really pivotal role in the functioning of society. And it played a pivotal role in explaining social phenomena. For example, the poor were looked upon as being poor because they were destined by God to be poor. And that's how they explained why people are poor, for example. The metaphysical stage was kind of a transition away from this explaining everything by God or religion and sort of more towards a scientific stage. And then finally you had the scientific stage where instead of explaining things or having laws that were based on religion, you had a complete separation of church and state. You had this idea that we no longer want um, tradition and superstition and religion to govern our way of life, our way of thinking, the way that our society functions, our laws and things like that. That instead we want to start looking at things in a different way. We want to start explaining things based on fact, logic, reason, um, versus this theological way of life. Harriet Martineau was an English woman. She was a social theorist and a writer. She was mostly famous for translating Comte into English, which doesn't seem like a big deal nowadays, but it was then. Because if it wasn't for her or someone like her that was willing to go through Comte's work and translate it into English, basically you would have never left France. Sociology would have never left France. See, Auguste Comte was French. She also wrote a couple books like Theory and Practice of Society in America, where she studied class, gender, and race. She advocated for the abolishment of slavery, which was very radical at her time. And she wrote another book called How to Observe Morals and Manners, which was a methods book in sociology. So it was kind of teaching methods of how do we study morals and manners. Emile Durkheim is one of the most famous sociologists. He